My name is Mike Ward. I head up the Evaluation and Learning Initiative of the Climate Investment Funds. And I just wanted to extend a really warm welcome to everybody here to this working session of the Transformational Change Learning Partnership. For those that are new, the TCLP is hosted by the Climate Investment Funds as a community of practice for deepening transformational impact, the transformational intent of a wide range of development-orientated activities. To date, over 1,000 people representing more than 350 institutions have contributed into the work over almost 10 years now. And we're very pleased to have Tim Larson, the president of Ross Strategic, who have played a foundational role both in shaping the work and the collaborative networks connected to the TCLP. So Ross Strategic have been doing a number of interlinked pieces of work to understand country platforms, their potential to contribute into our collective work. And more what we're trying to do is to explore here how we deepen the transformational intent and impact of country platforms. So I know that Tim will introduce the contributors in this session, but I did also want to really extend my warm welcome to both Daniela and Candice, who've supported our work in many different and very significant ways. So a big thank you to the group that will present, to everybody else who's attending and will contribute, hopefully, your thoughts. We really encourage you just to drop questions, comments into the chat, and we'll pick them up as we move along. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Tim. Thanks very much,
Great.
Tim.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you all of you for joining. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're hoping to accomplish today. We wanted to just create some space to really explore. There's been a lot of attention to the concept of country platforms for climate and development finance. And one of the areas that has not had as much attention is how monitoring, evaluation, and learning can support country platforms in powerful ways. To set the stage, though, we wanted to spend a little time kind of just talking about what are country platforms and what might they look like. And it's really a deep pleasure to have Dr. Daniela Tafaria from the Ministry of Finance in Brazil here. I'll introduce both our speakers more in a few minutes, but who can speak about some pioneering work that Brazil has done in advancing the concept of country platforms and actually putting them in place. And also have Dr. Candice Morkel from IPDET, and I'll introduce her a little bit more as well in a minute, to be able to talk about some of the global infrastructure we have on evaluation, learning, use of evidence that's relevant to the climate space that may create some insights about ways we can really build in-country capacity to support country platform concepts and their ability to really leverage and impact climate action at scale. As a little bit of background, for those of you who may not be tracking kind of the concept of country platforms that closely, it's kind of been around for a couple years, but really received more attention probably around 2018, I believe. There was a report of the G20 Eminent Persons Group on global finance governance that really put a stake in the ground and said, we need to be thinking more about these country platform ideas of ways to coordinate multiple actors around climate finance. In 2020, the G20, the Saudi-led G20 endorsed the G20 reference framework for effective country platforms, and there was kind of gaining steam. And then more recently in the G20 context, the government of Brazil and governments of South Africa, two of the recent hosts or current hosts of the G20, have really tried to champion that. And we'll see a little bit more about how far Brazil has gone in trying to champion and kind of test and demonstrate the concept of country platforms. There has been a lot of question about, so what is a country platform? And you can get a lot of different definitions. I'm going to paste into chat here just a little bit of text of something that we piece together, which may or may not be. I mean, they can look a little bit different, but ultimately, they're really frameworks that are led by national governments to coordinate and align diverse but related climate and development investments from various sources, both within the country, potentially leveraging national development banks, but also thinking about bilateral donors, multilateral development banks, multilateral climate funds, private sector partners and other stakeholders to really bring some more coherence, reduce transaction costs, and ensure that kind of these investments are aligned with country goals and plans. And I think it'll be great to hear kind of Daniela's thoughts in particular on kind of how Brazil thinks about this concept. But some key attributes that have been pushed out there in many venues have been around country ownership, around that alignment of multiple stakeholders, really focusing on transformational change through investment, not just one-off projects, but thinking about how projects connect up with national development goals, achieving nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, national adaptation plans, and things like that. So that's a little bit of context around these. I'll paste in one or two links to some background documents related to the G20 that would give you a little bit more information if you're interested on the country platforms. But really, without further ado, I'd love to hear from our speakers here. We'll hear briefly from each of them, and then we'll open it up, and would like to use the bulk of the time today for really kind of collaborative conversation around kind of what are the opportunities and implications for monitoring, evaluation, and learning to support this work. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Daniela de Faria with the Ministry of Finance in Brazil, part of the official with the team of the General Coordination of Sustainable Finance. And Dr. de Faria has been instrumental in kind of Brazil's coordination and work with multilateral climate funds, but also with the new country concept or country platform implementation work. So Dr. de Faria, really thrilled to hear from you, and I'll turn the floor over to you now.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. We have been really trying to advance this topic of country platform, not only as our strategy to achieve our climate goals, but also as a global strategy to achieve the finance that developing countries need to achieve the overall goals for climate change. So yeah, continuing on what Tim was saying with Brazil's work on the G20 last year, especially with our presidency and the Task Force for Climate Mobilization, we tried to continue the work that had previously begun in the G20 about country platform and push it forward. So we had I'm going to say priority within the task force to build high-level principles for country platforms. And we had a lot of discussions on how country platforms can enhance country ownership, enhance the programmatic approach that countries build around their strategies to implement projects to bring results. And then I think connected to all this work that we had in the G20, we started working on our own country platform, which is called BIP. It's the Brazilian Investment Platform, and this is the one that I'm going to present for you today. So Brazil has set an ambitious goal for climate change. We aim to be net zero by 2050, and for that we have created a lot of different national plans. And then the idea of the country platform is that it's anchored in our major targets and plans. So, for example, in the Ministry of Finance, we have an ecological transformation plan that is multi-sectoral. In the Ministry of Environment, we have, they lead the NDCs, but also we have a lot of different plans for national vegetation restoration, for restoration of degraded lands, combating deforestation, bioeconomy, waste. And so in terms of environment and finance, I think we are the two things that are really leading the platform. And we have the line ministries, what we call, for the country platform that is now in operation. I'm going to show you for you later, but it's a multi-sector platform. And then the line ministries that are involved in the country platform, they are pretty much related to the sectors that we have chosen to be integrated in the platform. So one of them is the Ministry of Industry. So they have this big plan called New Industry Brazil that has a strong component of sustainable development. And we also have the Ministry of Energy. They also have a national plan for energy transition. And I think cross-cutting to all of them is our national climate plan. It's related to our new NDCs, and it has a component of implementation as well. So it perpasses all of the sectors. And we are, of course, having the support of the BNDES, which is the Brazilian National Development Bank. They are the platform secretariat lead. So I think this is one of the key ingredients for strategic success, to have them on board and with their expertise and ownership. BNDES is a very big national development bank, not only in terms of size of envelope and finance, but in terms of results and impacts. And I think to really our capacity to be operational depends on them. And we are having support from different partners. Defense, I think, is one of the major ones. They are with us from the very beginning of the design phase. And we have a staff supported by Defense to support the Secretariat. So what is our vision with BIP? As Tim said, I think country platforms mean different things for different countries. And I think that's okay too. One of the points of having a country platform is strengthening your country ownership. And this means having flexibility to develop what makes sense for your country. So I think it's pretty much okay that a country platform for Brazil is going to be one way, and for other countries, it's going to be a different way. But in our vision, our country platform is a framework, as Tim said, to connect financial institutions to projects, but focusing on private sector. So our country platforms only considers private sector projects. And we are building a pipeline of private sector projects. We don't design new projects. We don't create projects to go into the platform, but we assess projects that already exist in the private sector. If they are aligned to our national climate plans and our goals and fit the criteria that we have come up, they enter the platform's pipeline. And then we start connecting financial institutions with the project proponents to see if we can push them forward. So we have this whole enabling environment where we connect projects, financial institutions, but also we have different government initiatives. So not only our national climate plans, but we also have instruments to try to push the platform forward. So for example, we have Eco-Invest Brazil, which is also relatively new instrument that we have here. It's an action that was supported by IDB here in Brazil. And we, with Eco-Invest, it's in our treasury. We try to help investors and project proponents to overcome financial barriers. So, for example, we have a pillar for local currency finance. We have had auctions for projects in the past, and this is a new model that we are really trying to see how we can connect it to BIP to facilitate investors. But our goal is to connect everything that we have, also the emission of sovereign bonds, to see how we can facilitate the implementation of the strategic projects that we see will help Brazil achieve its goals. We have sectoral initiatives, and we are connecting with many stakeholders. I think I've seen some MDB's representatives here today, so they might have seen the presentation of the country platform before, because we have been in intense contact with them. DFIs, and all the climate funds. So as I said, our country platform is multi-sectoral, which is a little bit different than I think the most traditional ones that are focused on energy. So here in Brazil, we have selected 3 sectors, which is nature-based solutions and bioeconomy, industry and mobility, and energy. And all the sectors have subsectors. So each subsector has a different set of criteria for projects to comply with so that they can enter the pipeline of the platforms. And as you can see here in the top, there are different national plans that are aligned to each sector. So the overall criteria for a project to meet to enter the pipeline is that it needs to be aligned with our transition plans and national programs. It has to have material environmental impact. It has to have a material amount of capital mobilization and support from the platform needed. So this is important. For example, the projects that we are receiving in the platform, they are large-scale projects. So we have, for example, projects that are over $1 billion, the size of envelope that they need to be completely financed. Of course, it changes a little bit with the sector. For nature-based solutions and bioeconomy, the scale is a little bit smaller than for others, but it's still considered a large-scale project for the sector. And it also has to depend on international capital. So projects that could be financed here in Brazil from domestic resources, they are not the ones that we are really targeting in the platform. They have to show socioeconomic benefits, promotion of technological development. So we're trying to have really innovative projects in the platforms. And then they have to be aligned with credible climate frameworks, including private FIs, net zero commitments, and taxonomy, other frameworks where they are applicable. This slide, I think many countries are interested in is the governance of the platform, how we have structured this. So we have a steering committee that is composed of ministries. The Ministry of Finance leads the platforms in terms of day-to-day and decision-making and engagement with partners. So we have been making, for example, this presentation for a lot of partners, not only TFIs, but also a lot of other ministries of finance. We have been working with the Coalition of Finance Ministers to push this agenda forward. And we have the other ministries that are in the steering committee, which is the ministries that I have said earlier, industry, environment, and energy. In terms of decision-making power in the steering committee, all the ministries have the same level of decision-making power. And we have, in an operational level, the Secretariat, which is led by BNDES. So BNDES is the Secretariat of the platform. They deal with the day-to-day operations of the platform. So they are the ones that assess if projects meet the criteria or not. They are the ones that make project presentations for financial institutions. They are the ones that are really seeking for finance. And then we have working groups for each sector. So we have one working group for NBS and bioeconomy, industry and mobility, and energy. What is the difference between this level and the steering committee? In terms of representation, it's more or less the same, but it's the working groups are more in a technical level, and then the steering committee is in a high level decision making. So for example, if the Secretariat wants to change a criteria for a specific subsector or not, they would consult the working group, and then we could adapt one of the criteria. We have a strong network partnership. As I said, we have defense from the start, BNDES, but now we have the Green Climate Fund and UNDP. We have a readiness project with the TCF to build the Secretariat. So We are now in the phase of hiring the staff for the first 2 years of the platforms with the support from GCF and UNDP, the delivery partner. And then we have a supporter network broader with civil society organizations and private sector federations, NGOs, that they have been in consultations with them as well to come up with the criteria and trying to align our strategies to what they see it's important as well. I think this is more specific about how the working groups work. I think I won't go into these specific details right now. If you have any questions, you can ask me later. And then just to have a practical overview of what's happening right now. The Secretariat is conducting these project calls. So I think we have 14 projects that are in the platform's pipeline right now. I think together they aim to mobilize more than $14 billion in finance. And then what the Secretariat do is that they arrange these project calls with, I think, 2 or 3 projects by time with financial institutions. And then they can have like a pitch for the project, and then financial institutions, they can ask for doubt and this kind of thing. And then they move forward with that. So I think for next steps, we're going to continue to build the pipeline of the platforms. We are trying to connect as most as we can. We're trying to connect the pipeline of the platform with other pipelines here in Brazil. So for example, with GCF, I guess we're going to connect the pipeline, the Brazilian pipeline for GCF, for private sector, with the platform. For CIF, we have submitted for the futures window in December with IDB and World Bank some proposals that were approved, and then we are going to see if we can connect the projects that are going to be developed in the proposal with the platform. We are also talking to Jeff to see how we can connect them with the platform and also with the MDBs in general, for projects that are not necessarily from the climate funds. So we are trying also to identify barriers for capital mobilization and see how we can overcome this. So this is where the EcoInvest, for example, enters. We are trying to go forth with the conversation that we're having with them to how they can serve better the projects that are more strategic in the platform, and how we can connect both actions. And yeah, this is the point 3, to structure potential solutions to barriers. So that's it. This is more directed for financial institutions, but we have a website where you can find more content about the platform and about the projects and the criteria. If you want to know the criteria for each subsector, it's available in the website, and this is the Secretariat contact. So thank you. And I think we're going to have questions later at the end, right?
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniela. And let's hold your questions, or feel free to chat them in. We're going to go to Candace in a second, but I just want to call it, I think that kind of a little bit of details about what these things look like is really helpful to think about. How then can monitoring, evaluation, learning, use of evidence support them, and both within individual platforms, but also across, as countries are trying to develop other platforms in their country, or as other countries are looking at it, what can we learn and how do we understand the evolution of these platforms about what works, what doesn't in different contexts. In addition, there's huge monitoring, evaluation, and learning needs connected with how is the collection of investments that are aligned under them really producing change and impact in the country, looking both at the climate dimensions and the socioeconomic dimensions that it was interesting to see the criteria for decision, and clearly that sets up a whole range of MEL support opportunities to really understand actual progress on the ground and implementing and what that looks like. So I think that's a great segue then into hearing from Dr. Candace Morkel. and really thrilled to have Candace with us, who recently took on the role of head of program at the International Program for Development Evaluation Training, IPDET. And previously, Dr. Markle served as the director of Clear Anglophone Africa, where she led numerous initiatives across the Global South, focused on national evaluation capacity building. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Candace to hear some reflections on MEL opportunities related to country platforms.
Thank you so much, Tim, and always a great pleasure to be here and to share my thoughts. So I'm going to answer the 4 questions that were posed to me, maybe reduce it to 3, seeing as I'd really like to engage with the group after my presentation. The first question that was posed is, what do I see as the importance and role of MEL capacity building for the effectiveness and scaling transformational intent or impact of country platforms? So unequivocally, I just want to state upfront that MEL capacity building is essential. And in my previous role as the CLEAR director, we did a couple of capacity assessments called MESAs, Monitoring and Evaluation Systems Analyses. And these always confirmed that there were both technical and non-technical capacities that were really lacking in the public sector, but many institutions as well. And then in my role currently at IPDET, there's a ceaseless rising demand for capacity building. But the question also challenged me because it got me thinking about whether we have reached a point where we really do know exactly how or why capacity development programs have or have not worked. I was thinking particularly about, for example, the last 60 or so years of public sector reform programs on the African continent by MDBs, because I'm always confronted by the question by MDBs when we talk about some of the work that we do. And then more directly to the question, what sort of keeps me awake at night in my current role is, we know enough about what works, under what circumstances, for whom, and to what end in MEL capacity building. So I know there's been a lot of work done by some authors, particularly in North America. Some of you might know Jean King, Hallie Preskill, Beverly Parsons, but then also the CLEAR centers have been doing a lot of work about what works in capacity building. But I wonder sometimes how effectively we are applying these. So for example, we default to designing MEL capacity building along the lines of institutional training programs. And then although we might have some bright ideas around things like mentorship, on-the-job learning, and some other innovative ways of learning, I think the funding often runs out before we can attempt those other innovative ideas. So I do think we need a transformation in how we design MEL learning programs and really draw a lot more on the work of learning professionals. There are experts who've been looking at learning, what works in learning for decades. And I think we're not in the M&E sector, not really drawing on their evidence and their skills enough. And then that took me to the second question around what types of MEL capacity needs do I envision that country platforms have. And I'm so pleased and impressed by Dr. Faria's description of the BIP. Obviously, it's very sophisticated in what it's doing. And I'm on a learning curve in terms of what country platforms are as well. So that was really wonderful to hear that. But it really led me to thinking about the theory of change for country platforms. And of course, now I understand that it would vary across different country platforms. But have we really investigated how they are intended to influence and support climate action, what causal mechanisms and assumptions they hold? And then what are the actual MEL challenges within them and then across the country platforms as individual institutions, but also collectively? I don't think we have that knowledge yet about that. So if we have more of that information, I think we can better answer the question, what the needs are. But drawing from my understanding of country platforms currently and also my work across national and subnational evaluation systems over the last 20 or so years, I want to focus specifically on state capacity because the G20 framework so deliberately talks about the fact that these are country-level mechanisms set out by governments and that they must have strong government ownership, which means that state capacity for MEL must be really strong as well. But we also know that state capacity over the decades has been cheapened sort of by, the capacity of the state being bureaucratic capability and technical capabilities and administrative capabilities, to commission and manage evaluations specifically, and to a much more limited extent to actually conduct evaluations. But when we are talking, for example, about the evaluation demands and requirements of MDBs, BFIs, other, institutions, other multilateral institutions, then we are really talking about the state capacity to support the evaluation efforts of these other institutions. So what are we really talking about when we're talking about the capacity for country platforms? Are we talking about government capacity, or do we just want to build capacity to support MDBs and other institutional partners to conduct their evaluations? And I think we need to engage around that, because state capacity is complex, it's multidimensional, it's arduous to define and operationalize, and there are other adjacent capacities that I think we must not forget. So we mustn't focus our attention only on what kind of technical capacities are needed, because then we're going to build something that's only about how do you do an evaluation, how do you commission an evaluation, how do you synthesize evidence, but we're not focusing on what is it, to what end, what impact or result does the country platform want to achieve in terms of the bigger ambitions of the country platform. So some of these other adjacent capacities that are really weak in states in general, and also I'm speaking to my experience in my work on the African continent. One of them is in selectivity and prioritization, and the ability to be exceptionally selective about policy and programmatic choices using evidence and learning. I think, when you work at the level of a microcosm of national evaluation systems and subnational, one is really surprised at how rudimentary decision-making becomes at the level of program managers, program leaders, between the policy discussions that are happening at a very strategic level, but then by the time it gets to program leaders who have to actually convert these into actual plans, becomes completely rudimentary, and you actually lose, what is actually meant to be a policy decision that ends up in strategic plans, and then also monitoring and evaluation systems. And I think that there's a huge disjuncture there. And then I think the capacity for coherence of the state, because obviously a country platform requires great coherence as well. Then we sort of delve into the question around, do you need a strong state or a weak state? And I think these are some more strategic questions around developmental states. If you think about the global south in general, there's been a push for developmental states, and I think the rising urge for the sovereignty of states, for states to be able to define their own strategic goals and the impact that they're wanting to achieve. But at the same time, there are these kind of power asymmetries in some of the countries in the global south, where that fight for that kind of sovereignty or the ability to determine where the development is leading has to do with the ability of the state to bring about that coherence. So I think in that kind of tension that there must be the ability to lead to more trust and cooperation and results. And in terms of the real politic of how these things work at these strategic levels, sometimes there's a level of distrust, and maybe these country platforms are not necessarily taking these kind of geopolitical considerations, into effect in terms of things around aid and trade and so forth. And then I think also another capability that needs to be built, a adjacent capability, is the ability to have deep connectedness to a broad network of social groups and classes. So I think that is really, really important. I've got a minute to wrap up, but I just want to talk quickly about the infrastructure that is present and available to country platforms. So IPDET, for example, is a very iconic training program, evaluation capacity development program that is available to country platforms. And they partner under the umbrella of the Global Evaluation Initiative alongside CLEAR centers, which are, in regions assisting national evaluation systems, in terms of capacity development as well. So country platforms, if they can find the machinery and the mechanisms to link up with these, there is no need to develop new capacity development initiatives or systems. I think what is needed to say, how do we draw on what is, the comparative advantages of our collective abilities, and how do we assess, first of all, what the needs are, and then how do we use some of these institutions that are already existing to build capacity, to come alongside country platforms and to design tailored solutions then also, more comprehensive solutions that can perhaps meet the needs of country platforms across the board. Let me stop there. Thank you very much, Tim.
Great, Candace, thank you so much. And just like to a huge thank you to both Daniela and to Candace for sharing a lot of great thoughts. For the next 20 minutes or so, we'd love to open it up for, first of all, questions that people may have for Daniela or Candace, but also just kind of your reflections. I'm going to paste into chat a few questions that we thought of in advance that may be helpful to guide thinking, but we'd love your reactions to both these presentations and opportunities that you see for really advancing thinking around the MEL systems that could be helpful to support country platforms. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a questions or to chat it in. We'd love to hear from folks. The questions are going in right now to the chat. Let's see. Anybody have a question for either of them or reflections based on the conversations? Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just to kick it off, a huge thanks to both Daniela and Candace. I think that what Daniela's presentation did for me was to show the many different spaces in which these country platforms are going to have influence and need kind of collaborative work. And the piece from Candace, the many different kind of monitoring, evaluation, and learning processes that will be needed to support this. I suppose the question that I would have to both Daniela and Candace is if we were to prioritize, so if Daniela was to prioritize across, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Energy, and BNDES, where do we focus a kind of building of monitoring, evaluation, learning capacity? And then maybe once we've identified kind of where we focus some of that attention, then maybe from Candace, how do we focus that? So, what would be like a couple of key things that we could engage in to support more, I suppose, transformational intent and impact through the monitoring, evaluation, and learning work that we do? Thanks, Tim.
Thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, either Candace or Daniela, reflections on those questions?
I can go first, and just to mention, because we haven't in the presentation, about monitoring, evaluation, learning in the country platform. So this is since it's very new, the launch and the operation of the country platform, we don't have a structure for monitoring and reporting yet, but since we have the National Development Bank as the secretariat, they have their own monitoring and report framework for the projects that they fund. So I think this is another strength and opportunity that we have to rely on them to use their framework to monitor projects in the platform. We actually had a meeting with them yesterday, and we talked about this very briefly, and they said they are thinking about structuring some kind of monitoring and reporting for the platform, but they are kickstarting the platform and the secretary staff, so they are more focused on that right now. But they, of course, I think they have seen already the need for that and the need to show results, because one of the things that we are trying to achieve with the platform is also showing other countries and other institutions that this is a model that can bring results. So I think we have to show how we have achieved these results, and monitoring and reporting comes in this sense. In terms of where we can build the capacity, as Mike said, I guess in our case, I think it would be in the National Development Bank. I think they will be the ones that will track progress and build and monitoring. But I guess what we are trying to come up with right now, I think it's one of the challenges that I think we shouldn't have a very complex framework for monitoring and reporting with the country platform, because most likely all the financiers will have their own monitoring and reporting, and they will have like compliance indicators and this kind of thing. So I don't think we want to add on the complexity and the amount of work that they are already going to have to comply, but maybe having like general indicators that will most likely be on the frameworks that they will already have to report, and then using this in the country platforms to have comparable framework of indicators and parameters that you can use to track progress a long time.
Great, thanks. Candace, any reflections on Mike's questions?
I think where we should focus is to first make sure that we know and we understand the capacity needs, but then also what exists, what do we have in hand? So what are the existing ways in which decisions are taken and made? Where can M&E add value, and what are the gaps and the challenges in terms of that? So I think that's kind of like an institutional assessment, but also then obviously you need assessment of capabilities that exist to close that gap. And I think also to distinguish between the monitoring and the evaluation for accountability part and the evidence for learning part, because I think that there's definitely going to be, a set of indicators required and reporting, on NDCs and whatever, all of those things that require regulatory reporting. But there's an element of the learning, I think, that we shouldn't forget to foreground. And I think that's often where things are lacking in M&E systems, to say, where do we most need the decision-making to have an impact? And then distinguishing in between the roles of what kind of capacity development is needed. You've got the technical people who need to know how to do better evaluations, use better methods, more innovative methods to find the kind of information and evidence that decision makers need. But then you also need capacities for leadership and management of the evaluation system and even design of it. But then you also need capacities for evidence brokering. How do you get people to shepherd that evidence to the right spaces so that decisions can be taken where they need to be taken? So I think that it cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution, but you also need to first of all understand what are we working with. So I would start there.
Great. Just looking at the chat, Brendan, you have some really interesting thoughts and questions. I was wondering if you could bring some voice to those. Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, sure. Great to hear these really interesting reflections, both grounded in the context of Brazil and kind of on capacity for doing this more broadly. I was kind of listening for kind of top down and kind of bottom up types of dynamics. Obviously, these kinds of plans can bring a lot of strategic coherence for kind of more transformation beyond piecemeal kind of projects. But then they do also have to interact with the messy realities and existing kind of structures and stakeholders are kind of from top down to bottom. And I was just wondering how MEL can also play a role in kind of interfacing with people at the front lines of kind of delivering and being impacted by this diversity of projects to both inform what's going on at kind of the bottom kind of the pyramid, but also make sure that adaptation and decisions, as Candace was just mentioning, are kind of informed by that and adapted kind of across the chain. So just, yeah, bridging bottom up and top down through MEL and also broader processes.
Thanks so much, Daniela or Candace. Does that raise any reflections for you?
Yeah, I'd love to. Oh, Daniela, please go ahead.
Okay, sorry. No, very briefly, what I was thinking that what Brendan raised, I think it's a point that is very relevant for other programs and projects that we implement, not only in the country platform. So I think it's not a new challenge. That's what I'm saying. And for example, with the projects that we implement with the climate funds, we have the same challenge. And I think we always try to come up with governance structures that involve the people on the ground, communities, grassroots representatives, but it's not always easy. And I think it's not always we are able to achieve the representation that we want to achieve, so to give them voices. And I think it's also a challenge to see how we could, I'm going to say the word enforce, but I think it's not the best one, but to enforce this with the financiers, because as I said, in the country platform, we are mainly intermediaries. So I don't know at what extent we have the capacity to enforce, for example, you need to build this type of governance or not. But I can see that as the way that it's shaping up right now, it seems that being in the country platform will give you a strategic advance over others. So I think that's where we have the leverage to really try to have criteria, and then we can higher the level of what we need what we need from them to be in the country platform. Since we are in the beginning phase, I think a lot of things will play out as we develop projects and we secure financing. And I think a lot of these ideas will be better, will be clear as we go further than it's right now. I'm going to pass to Candice.
Thanks, Daniela. No, certainly, I think that what we haven't done well enough in the M&E sector is to sort of democratize and decentralize the malfunction, especially if we're looking at like these big institutions and the evaluation organizations in MDBs and other multilateral institutions, but even in the public sector, it sort of sits up there hierarchically and an upward accountability, like information generated from below goes up to the top. And I think also one of the factors here is also, it's what I mentioned earlier on, is it a strong state, weak state kind of tension? Like, is the state, pursuing a developmental state status? Is it really interested in deliberative democratic institutions? And to what extent is it willing to allow for those voices from below to influence its policy decision making? So that factor is really, really important, because in MAL we can, put forward guidelines and train people. But if that part of this, how the state positions itself in terms of that, if that is different, so that is why I say one has to understand what you're working with, to see where the evidence and knowledge brokering is actually required. But honestly, I think that even in the M&E sector, we have not done enough in saying, like, how do we democratize MAL? Not all of the MAL systems need to be filtered up to the hierarchy, in terms of reporting. When I say democratize it, have communities and those who are leading on interventions have their own MAL systems for their own learning as well. And some of these things will be part of governance structures and some of them won't. And I think the more we get people to understand how important MAL is for learning and improvement, it will be a snowball effect. Of course, you will still need those structures and institutions for governance purposes as well.
Thanks so much for those reflections. I was struck in Danielle, in your slide that had the governance structure and whether there might be some creative ways to leverage the supporter network at the bottom that includes many civil society organizations, potentially philanthropy or others, and the partner network as a kind of mechanism for bringing evidence and learning into this in ways that really inform kind of project design, project selection and stuff beyond just kind of a more formal MEL system to, for accountability and kind of reporting purposes. But another thing, just given the complexity of these, I mean, there's a whole lot of coordination of a whole lot of actors, and so you're undoubtedly going to be learning things about what works, what doesn't, what does it take to really make a country platform work. And I wonder if you all have been thinking about how to capture those emergent lessons that are, the insights that are emerging from the work in ways that may be shared, or what additional kind of learning and insight generation can really capture the emergent nature of this so that we benefit in other contexts from things emerging from this work. And I'm just curious, is that something that's been talked about, or what opportunities do either of you see in that area?
Yes, Tim, I think this is very important. As I said, since it's in the very beginning, we don't have lessons learned yet, but what we are trying to come up with an agenda of peer-to-peer exchange on country platforms. So maybe the experience of Brazil doesn't have lessons learned yet because it's very new, but we have countries that have been have prior experience with country platform, as South Africa, for example. And this, I think this peer-to-peer exchange would be very benefit so that we can move forward with the model and expand it for other countries. In terms of how to structure that, I think, again, it's in the National Development Bank. They are the ones that are conducting this more operational and in-depth content. And I think, for example, in the steering committee that we have in our governance, one of the topics that we have is that the secretariat, they when the committee meets, they bring like decision points and what has been being successful and what's not being successful. How can we improve that? How can we adapt? For example, in the terms of barriers for financial mobilization, one of the things that we have seen so far is that maybe not all the projects that go into the platform are bankable in terms of financiers' view. So we are trying to come up with a solution. So how can we improve this? How can we make projects more bankable? How can we overcome financial barriers? So do you need local finance? So in this sense, also building an enabling environment around the country platform that will allow the projects to go forward.
Thanks. Candace, any reflections on that one?
I actually want to link it to a question in the chat from Madeline Darling about, being curious to hear where this kind of democratization of MAL really worked well. Not in enough spaces, but certainly I think there are some spaces where they're doing quite a lot of in-depth work with local communities around, for example, indigenizing MAL practice and really going to, what's the lens with which we develop these M&E systems and these indicators and whose knowledge is valued. And I think that kind of work in New Zealand, in Canada, in some countries in Latin America as well, specifically on indigenous evaluation systems, a lot of work is being done there. And I know that things around, for example, women's empowerment groups where they actually design their own evaluation system and their own indicators. And if you email me, I can try to find where, I've seen that information. And if you really are interested, I can try to find it for you and send it to you. But it's not enough. It's kind of these bespoke spaces where it's happening. It's not the general way of doing MAL. It's generally at the moment the bottom and just one way unilateral kind of information, sending it to the top. And I think we need to do a lot more in terms of making sure that everybody feels that learning and M&E is useful. It's a strategic tool that can support decision-making, that can also help communities feel and citizens feel that they're part of the process of policy-making as well.
Great. Thanks so much. I think we are approaching the end of time. I do just refer people to a couple other comments in the chat that I encourage you to read from Elizabeth, from Yovo. I think this has been a just really provocative discussion, and I see this as really kind of a starting place, to really build some momentum around thinking about the roles that monitoring, evaluation, learning in multiple different spaces related to country platforms can really make a difference for accelerating learning, accelerating and enhancing the power and impact of country platforms. I think there's going to be a window. I think, Daniel, I sense you reference this as Brazil trying to have a demonstration project of what this can really look like to demonstrate the power. And so I think anything we can do to kind of support that kind of rapid cycling of information, learning capacity around that will be really key, not just to telling the story, but hopefully to kind of that real course real-time adjustment as you're learning and adapting this system. So a few things wanted to maybe just turn to Mike real quick, and Mike could see if you have any closing thoughts for on the substance of the call, and then I've got a few logistical announcements at the end before we wrap.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks to both Daniela and Candice and everybody who contributed. I think, you know, as country-led initiatives, these country platforms really need to draw on what it is that countries are prioritizing and how they're doing it. So absolutely amazing to have Brazil's example, having led the G20 last year, and all of the work that they contributed into kind of shaping the ideas behind this, really valuable. And then Candice with all of her experience in South Africa and more broadly as South Africa takes up the G20 presidency and we start to think through what the potential is for this kind of country-led work. So I think that is really important. We're very keen, obviously, as a multilateral fund to support this work, to think through together how it is that we do a number of things, one of which is scaling. And I think Elizabeth's comment around how do we connect people needing to find more sustainable ways of cooking, for example, to these kind of big systemic processes that are being shaped by national development banks and by national governments. So, and it's that kind of connection, I think, that we're really trying to support in the transformational change work. So a huge thanks to everybody for that. Just to say that in a couple of the future working sessions, we have a working session on the third Thursday of every month. Scaling is definitely on our list to have a look at over the next little while. How do we think through scaling? And I know other work going on in other climate funds, as well as kind of a call to action. How do we as people involved in monitoring, evaluation, learning with a big focus on transformational climate action, work in our institutions and collaboratively, and we'll pick up on some of that work in some of the future working sessions. So yeah, Tim, with that, a huge thanks to everybody for being here, and over to you for logistical thoughts.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. And as Mike kind of alluded to, the next third Thursday, which will be on April 17th, same time, we'll actually focus on an invitation to action. We'll hear from representative from Rockefeller Foundation, Shauna Hoffman, who's been leading some work to and kind of to build kind of cross-sector collaboration among MDBs, multilateral institutions and climate funds, among philanthropy, civil society, to really kind of rethink the role that evidence, evaluation, and learning can play around the climate space. And so I'll put a brief link into if you want to learn a little bit more about that, but that'll be an opportunity to learn more about that invitation to action and to engage in discussion around it. So I just want to thank again Candice and Daniela for joining us today and the very provocative conversation, and look forward to continuing to be in dialogue with you both. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining.